humanity. These could be differences in culture or ethnicity. They could be differences in demographics or abilities or even in age. My hope and prayer was that our children could see others as God sees them, that we are all fearfully and wonderfully made in the image of God. So every single life matters. We all have our uniquenesses. We all have a different purpose, and we're called to love one another. So I really wanted to open my children's eyes to those differences by using these books and resources. Another thing that we did over the past 1.5 to 2 years was exploring countries and cultures by My Father's World. This particular curriculum took us through a variety of different countries where we got to explore the culture, the language, the clothing, the foods that the people ate, the religions. We also created art from those different places and listened to music. So it just really opened their eyes to this greater world out there and to truly see God's heart for his world. In this book, there was a book list at the end that had different books from each country or region. And so we read through a variety of those books. We also used this particular resource, Give Your Child the World, Raising Globally Minded Kids One Book at a Time. So this one is just nothing but a big book list that is organized by country or region. And it also breaks it down further so you can find books for younger kids as well as older kids that, again, speak to those cultural differences. So I hope this will be helpful and inspire you. If you have your bucket planners, this is a good time to take it out, jot down the ones that work for your family, and then please share in the comments below so that we can continue to grow together and share those resources that'll give our children a heart for God's world. So this book is a great introduction for little children to help them understand this idea of the great big world around them. And so it begins with this character. And she's in her room, and so there's a small map of her room, and then it zooms out to her street, to her town, to her state, to her country, and then ultimately you get to the continents, and so that she can understand her place in it, but also to understand that bigger picture as you can introduce different stories from around the world and kind of where those places are located and what those cultures are like. Now this is another great book for that. It's called How to Make an Apple Pie and See the World. And so this character wants to make an apple pie, and in order to get her ingredients, she has to travel all around the world, and because the market is closed. And so she gets on a boat, she flies, and she just starts off in the countryside of Italy. She goes to France to get a chicken, Sri Lanka, England, and so forth. So it's a great way to introduce different countries, different foods, and agriculture that comes from different countries, and just to have a fun time exploring that. And of course, there's the recipe for apple pie in the back. But this book is just a beautiful book that talks about how in one moment in time, all sorts of things are happening around the world. And so here it says, somewhere in the world right now, it's deepest night. Fog hugs the shoulders of buildings and bridges. A baker slides long loaves of bread into an oven. Somewhere somebody watches a movie. A mouse hunts for crumbs. And so here it's nighttime, and it tells you what's happening here, like in Uganda and Kenya, Antarctica. And it just goes all the way around the world, showing how in some places it's dark, but in others dawn is breaking. A rooster's crowing, families are eating breakfast, and so forth. Now this one talks about the different people in the world. And so you can see there the author, but the only thing is I will say this book is dated, and so some of the numbers that it talks about are already wrong, or off I should say. But as far as like the number of human beings on Earth and by the year 2000, but if you can get past that page, it just talks about our differences, the differences in our noses, in our faces, in our hair, and how we fix our hair. It talks about people from all around the world wearing different clothing. some of our likes and dislikes, how we like to play, the things that we like to do for entertainment or for fun, what our homes look like, holidays and feasts, and so forth. So it just talks about the differences, and so it's a great introduction to talking about how people all around the world enjoy different things and live in different ways. This one's very similar, but it's just such a beautiful, beautiful book on all the colors of the earth and the colors of our skin. It says here, children come in all the colors of the earth. Such a beautiful book. The illustrations, the descriptions, the roaring browns of bears and soaring eagles, the whispering golds of late summer grasses, and crackling russets of fallen leaves, the tinkling pinks of tiny seashells by the rumbling sea, and on it goes. So just beautiful, beautiful book. I love this one. This one's called To Be a Kid, and it just talks about being a child all over in different parts of the world. So to be a kid means being carried by those who love you, and it shows what that looks like in different countries. But yet it's a similarity that we all share. And spending time with your family. So this one has photography, but just beautiful pictures. And again, it just talks about all the things that are similar, but yet how they look different across the world. Children Just Like Me is kind of similar under that thread, but it talks about different cultures from different countries by introducing you to the child from that particular area. So this child here, for example, is from Canada, and so you get the story, the child's story, their family, what they do for school, what they like to eat, how they like to dress. And so it just makes it more personable for children to not only understand the country, but the culture of the people living in that country. Now these books that I'm going to share are more like storybooks that just share these differences in cultures and in lifestyles. This one's about life on the farm, and so it's just a beautiful overview of the year on this farm and all the changes that happen with the farm animals, but it introduces children to farm life and what that looks like and what the children do while living on a farm. Cranberry Thanksgiving talks about a grandmother celebrating Thanksgiving. So again, this is a holiday here in the United States. But you'll notice that she invites every year, she asks to invite someone poor or lonely. And so she gets these two guests, and one is pretty put together, the other one's a little quirky. And as she makes this cranberry bread, they find that someone has stolen the recipe for the bread. And so instantly they think it's the quirky person, but it turns out that it was the one that was dressed nicely. So it's a good introduction to be able to discuss, should we judge people based on how they look on the outside? What are some things that we need to keep in mind when we meet new people? Mybuelita. Now this is a beautiful book that really showcases the Mexican-American culture. And so in it you see this child living with their grandmother, and you get some Spanish words here, her face, and some beautiful descriptions. So listen to this. It says her hair is the color of salt. Her face is as crinkled as a dried chile. But that doesn't matter. She is my abuelita. I love her and she loves me. And then it just talks about her grandmother, what life is like living with her. She's round and robust like a calabaza or a pumpkin. Beautiful illustrations. And at the end, so she's getting ready for something big, and at the end we find out that she is a storyteller. And this little child wants to be a storyteller just like her abuelita. Remember That celebrates Shabbat and Jewish culture. And so in it, this grandmother also shares Shabbat with her grandchild. And so they have all of these special memories of the child celebrating at her grandmother's house. But as the grandmother gets older, they still continue these traditions, but they change in location and in how they're carried out. So later grandma comes to live with the family, and eventually grandmother gets too old and sick and has to go live in a nursing home, but it's still something that they're able to share, and of course holding on to all those memories. And throughout it, the grandmother just shares so much wisdom with her grandchild, and it's just such a beautiful book on this special tradition, but also understanding the significance of it all through it. The Day of Ahmeds Secret. Now this is set in Cairo, Egypt. And it's about this child who has this secret, and all day long the secret's going to be like a friend to him, and he just cannot wait to share it with his family. Now before he does that, he has work to do in the city. And so it tells you a little bit about what his life is like in the city, what his work is like, what the sounds of the city are like. And then at the end, he's able to share his secret, and his secret is simply that he can write his name. And so that's just such a great introduction for children to see what it's like in other parts of the world and how children value that ability that we may take for granted here in the United States. Mahdi Snowman is something very similar. This child is introduced to a book about snow, and he cannot read it, but they are sharing with him what snow is. And so through that curiosity, he just gains this desire to want to learn how to read and expand his horizons in that way. The Lotus Seed. Oh, this is such a beautiful book set in Vietnam. Or the author lived in Vietnam, the narrator, and came to the United States to escape some of the oppression in her country. But from her country, she takes this lotus seed that stays with her all of these years. And this precious seed is something she eventually plants and takes these seeds to pass on to her children or grandchildren to share with them a part of who she was, a part of their culture, a part of their ancestors, and to be able to carry that memory forward. Grandfather's Journey is about a man who lived in Japan who ends up coming to America. And so you get to compare and contrast the lifestyles of each of these countries, how they dressed in Japan and how he dresses here in America. How he traveled in these areas and what his life was like in America. What he marveled at, the landscapes, and so forth. But eventually he does return back to Japan and he gets married, and you get to see their lifestyle there in Japan. And then it just continues about the stories of each of these places and how they just have such a special place in his heart. Daisy Comes Home is just set in China, and it's just a cute little story of this little girl who has these happy hens, and these hens she takes to market with her and ends up losing one of them, I believe. It's been a while. So this hen gets lost, Daisy, and then through her story you're able just to see more of what China is like, what the culture is like, the houseboats, and so forth. The animals that live there. Now the rag coat. This starts dealing, these books that I'll share here deal with poverty and helping children understand that just because someone does not have the resources that they have, this does not make them less of a person. It does not make them someone that they should be fun of. And so here we have this child who needs a coat. She doesn't have a coat for the winter time. And so her mother gathers these scraps or these rags from other women in the area, and she begins to sew or quilt together this rag coat. Now, when the child takes this coat to school, the children make fun of her. They tease her, they mock her, and she runs off, frightened, just terribly upset. And she just hears her father say, Minna, people only need people and nothing else. Don't you forget that. And so she gains the courage to be able to go back and face everyone in her class. And then she's able to tell them that these rags are each a part of their own stories. And so she's able to share that with them, and they get to see beyond the rag coat to who she truly is underneath. A Tree for Peter and the Family Under the Bridge also deals with homelessness, poverty, and just really helps open eyes to these cultures and what the people experience living in these areas, but also how to have a heart for their needs and to be able to just reach out as well. Give a Goat takes that a little bit further. Oops, just dropped these. And it's about a classroom learning about people on the other side of the world who aren't as well off and do not have access to these resources. And so they actually raise money to be able to send these people goats and other animals that will help keep or I guess a goat in this case, but they were able to get a chicken or some chickens and some ducks and to be able to help this family across the world. So definitely a neat book there. Other books here that I wanted to share are just books on our differences, like with special needs. And so in this one, there's a character in it that is a little different. He acts a little younger. It describes his special needs gently, but it also talks about how these bears respond to this child and how they show kindness and understand that God still loves him even for his differences. Out of Darkness is a biography on Louis Braille. It talks about how he went blind and just living in this school for other blind students. But it gives you some perspective on what it's like to be blind and what some of their challenges and his triumphs were during that time. Out of My Mind. Oh my goodness, this book talks about this girl that has cerebral palsy. So she cannot speak, but she is brilliant and lives in her mind. And so she shares her experiences in living in this wheelchair and being surrounded by other children and how they treat her and how they mock her and how do they ridicule her. And I used to read parts of this to students that I worked with, and they always were convicted of when they mocked a person that had special needs or were bullying other children because of their differences. So it really opened their eyes to the heart of a person and what we have or what we experience internally when we are made fun of or teased. So just a beautiful book. I cried on this one. It really opens your eyes to this this handicap, but just how she overcame it and was able to triumph anyway. The Trumpet of this one is an animal story, but once again we have Louis, who is different. He doesn't have the ability to make any sounds, and so he has to use his trumpet in order to do so. But again, he's able to overcome despite his handicap here. Babushkas Doll. Now, this particular story is about a grandchild with her grandmother, and she's always asking her grandmother to do what she wants to do, and she doesn't understand what her grandmother is going through with her own responsibilities and her abilities in general. And so eventually she comes across this doll, and her grandmother allows her to play with it, and the doll starts bossing her around and telling her, I want to do this and I want to do that, and pretty much acting the way she used to act with her grandmother. And so when the doll puts her in that position, she's able to open her eyes to what she must be, how she must be toward her own grandmother, and learn from that experience. This is another grandmother story where the child finds these artifacts in grandma's attic, and she's able to learn about what life was like for her grandmother when she was a little girl. And so again, it just opens children's eyes to the elderly. I think a lot of times they may be easily dismissed, and to see the wisdom that they have and to be able to understand that our elderly were once children too, and they have the same emotions and feelings that they do, and to hear their stories is just such a powerful, powerful tool. Storm in the Night is a grandson with his grandfather, and there is a storm outside, and during this time the grandson is asking his father, you know, what was life like when you were young? And so he's able to share some of that during this storm. Again, you have beautiful illustrations here between these two characters. Now these deal with slavery. Who owns a son? This is a powerful, powerful book. If your children are ready for this topic, I feel like this is a great introduction to it. It talks about this child who is sharing what his life is like. And the father tells him, only a fool believes he can own the sun. Everybody sees the sun's light, and everybody feels the sun's warmth, but the sun is too large, too great for one person to own. So it shines on all the earth and gives itself to every living thing. And this child talks about his life on this farm and how his father goes to work every day. But one day the child overhears the father's owner speaking and talking about how he owns his father. And so this little boy is just devastated because he doesn't understand that idea of slavery. And so he goes up to his father. Here's when he overhears that conversation. And he asks, does Mr. Finley own you? And I have a hard time even reading this. I cried so much when I first read it. It was when I saw the sadness in his face that I knew the words Mr. Finley had spoken were true. And then he says, but he doesn't own the stars or the sun, I reasoned, so how can he own you? And he says, a man is a beautiful thing, a very beautiful thing, but some men forget this. And sometimes they try to keep other men captive. They buy and sell people as if human beings are no more than cattle. But only a fool believes he can really own another man, and only a fool will try. Mr. Finley may own my body, but I have a heart and I have a mind, and he can never own these. Inside of me, I am too powerful to be owned by anyone. Inside, I am like the sun. And so it's just it was such a great introduction to my children. It was for them to understand what took place in our history, what still takes place with human trafficking, and just being able to pray for those still in bondage that they may be released from it all.